direction research goes and also how it's implemented. They have not only a really paradigm of gender equality, but they also have set in place a monitoring monitoring system to monitor equal opportunity. And I just want to go through with you through some facts, because I believe that in order to implement a cultural change, we do need first to define the status quo, then define the gaps, and then define the strategy to move to implement it, right? So what you see here is actually proportion of women that are involved in proposals for ongoing coordinated programs. What do I mean with this? So these are collaborative research centers. That is not only one PI, but there are several PIs that write a grant together as a collaborative research center. And there you can see that the maximum, well, there's an increase over years, right? But we're still stuck at 2021 with 24%, let's say 25% of women that are part in these applications, right? And the other point is here where I have the arrow is the research units. And I point that out because I'm a member of it. So I'm a member of a collaborative research center and also of a research unit. And that's, let's say the research units are smaller entities. It's not like 20 labs or groups that come together, but it's about between 6 and 8. And there we have also an increase in the participation of women in these research units and that's it's between 2018 and 2021. It has been it rose by almost 10%, but we're still at a third, right? So we're still not at 50% what we want to. Yes.
Ask, does that reflect more or less the ratio of women in like the sort of PI positions and so on?
Correct.
Actually allowed for
correct.
Sorry.
Yes.
No,
Yes.
Next slide.
Yes, you're right. You're right. This applies only to people. That applies only to women or men that are in the position of being able to apply for a grant. Correct. But I have some slides for later on, also for the younger guys. Here we go. So this is for the this is an overview for the collaborative research centers on how the proportion of women in the different levels, right? Of starting with the doctoral researchers, postdocs, then head of independent groups, junior professors, and professors. And I again point out, I have highlighted here the two panels to the right of you guys, and that's because life sciences is what we're working on, right? And engineering sciences, which is known to be the least progressive, right? So what we have here is basically on the so-called lower levels, but not less important levels. Really, I have to highlight this, right? Because the work has been done by the doctoral, the PhD students and the postdoctoral fellows, right? The daily work. The strategy work not, but the daily work, right? So we're almost reaching. We're over. On the student level, we actually are we're overrepresented with women, right? Because we're almost at 60%. The postdocs we reached 50%, but then if we look at the professors, it's only about 24%. Where women are actually in these deciding positions, right? And it's much worse in the engineering sciences, all right? And now I would like to just highlight really quickly what's going on when women apply for the individual grants within the DFG. And I also point out two categories because they are the most known ones and the research grants overall, but the second one, Eminöta program, has been basically created to foster women in research. And I was one of the first to get that. So in the first year when that has been implemented, this program, I was one of the first. And this is why I want to point this out because I think that was an important, and this was in the year 2000. So it's a long time ago. So already a long time ago, the DFG has tried to support women in research, and this highlights the lack, right, of implementation that we're actually facing, and why we need this discussion today. Okay. It's here similar. If you break it down in the single groups, or how the women, how the proportion of women in research training groups, it's similar as what I showed you for the research centers and in the research units. We are doing very well in the life sciences regarding the lower levels, but there's still a big lag in the leading positions. Very quickly here, which is also a big, I think an important message for you guys, is even though we increase, there is a certain increase in women applying for new proposals at the DFG, there's still between 60 and 80% of all applications are done by men. And if you then look at the success rate, the success rate is pretty even between women and men, then you can, by math, you know, okay, it's still the majority of grants are given to men, right? It's still like this, right? So, and that is a problem. And then if you look at the reviewer side, if you come from the reviewer side and see how many women are actually there who review the grants and give them their approval, we are somewhere between 10% and 34%. So there's actually 50% is far, far away. Why is that this way? I hope the panel can give us some answers afterwards, right? But this is, I think there is a big lag still. And now just some flashlights that got to the publication, like the press, but also like through our so-called Bible. Nature is our Bible, right? Where we want to publish. So I have put together a couple of papers I think that are important to set the stage for this discussion. First of all, we just come out of the Corona pandemic, and there have been a lot of research going on what happened to the research output between men and women. And you know, maybe you're already aware of it. Publication rate went up dramatically between men, but it didn't between women. And we all know why. We don't need to discuss this, but this is just an important fact. Then more and more researchers actually go through the pain to collect the data and really assess how big the lag is, to fill it with numbers. This is what we do in science. We collect evidence and then we present it, right? And then there are a lot of comments published in the last year. I just put together from last year these comments where several researchers are kind of trying to come up with solutions. And we will go through this also through during this discussion. It goes through the white male privilege, the old boys club, the affinity bias, that kind of spirals and gets women into a so-called death spiral, and they can't get out of this. And on the other hand, you have the disadvantages in competition for funding. And they're just to name a few. Here we have sexism and misogyny, exclusion from certain networks for women, and the intersectional inequalities. Another big paper I think is here to mention that it has been assessed how women are credited less in science than men. And even in China, they're waking up and have kind of measured the disparities between women and men in moving forward in their research career. And then last but not least, I think this I think is an important contribution, is where it has been assessed exactly where the pipeline is leaky, where we lose these women and in their career path, and also what are the tools in order to move forward. All right. And I think the last bits here is that people like researchers in the physics field, or actually it's published in Nature Astronomy, have done some calculations and have looked with the current policies that we have. It will take about 60 years before women form even a third of the academic forces. So just to set the stage. And yeah, I think that we should move on because I think it's late, right? So we should get going. So instead of having the normal introduction of panelists as we're used to, the classical way, I will just very briefly say 2 or 3 sentences to each our panelists, and then hopefully ask them to introduce themselves in a way like kind of that we get an impression of how they have tackled this topic in their career and what were the milestones where it was mostly affected. All right, if you can do this like in about 3 to 5 minutes each of you, and then we will start with the questions that we have collected, and I hope that the audience will also be very lively and participate. So first of all, I would like to introduce Muslifa Hanifa. She's a Malaysian dermatologist and immunologist that focuses on the development of the immune system and the use of single cell techniques to understand biology. She's a professor at the Wellcome Trust Senior Research Fellow in the Faculty of Medical Sciences at the Newcastle University, and she's deeply committed to our case by promoting gender equality in science, and has recently, basically last year, published in Nature Communications a roadmap on how we can actually achieve this goal. Then we have Bastian Rieck. He's a German computational scientist who's focusing on how to understand complex data sets and in biomedical contexts, and he's using as a technique the topological machine learning method, which I don't know anything about. So I think you guys are much more familiar with this. And he's a principal investigator at the IDOS lab here at the Institute of AI for Health and at the Helmholtz Pioneer Campus, and is also a member of the European Laboratory of Learning and Intelligent Systems, and serves also as a co-director for the Applied Algebraic Topology Research Network, or shortly AATRN. And then last but not least, we have Annalisa Marsico, and she's an Italian, and she's a specialist in bioinformatics, focusing on computational RNA biology, statistical modeling, and machine learning as well. And she is currently a group leader at the Institute of Computational Biology here at our center. And with that, I really would like you panelists to introduce yourself within 5 minutes, focusing on the traps and pitfalls that you encountered during your career process. And I would first start maybe with Muslifa. That would be okay?
She's muted.
She's muted.
We can't hear you.
I cannot do it.
Yeah, down. We can hear you now. We can hear you.
We can hear you now.
No,
No, we can't hear you again.
So what can we do now?
So maybe we start with.
We have questions in the meantime.
Yes, maybe.
Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes, awesome.
Fab. Okay. Well, firstly, thank you so much for the invitation, and happy International Women's Day to everyone. I think this is a fantastic forum, and it's a huge, great to see the number of people in the audience and online, and the willingness of the other panel members. So I'm going to answer the question that was posed, which is how I tackle the topic. And in my case, I came to Britain to study medicine. So I found myself as a foreign Asian woman in an environment that was completely strange at the age of 17, with my family and parents, the rest of them halfway around the world in Malaysia. So I kind of like experienced all of the intersectionalities that can also affect individuals, all individuals really. And essentially all my life, I kind of tried to understand how the system worked and how I could navigate through the system. And that is really something that I feel is very important in terms of start from the end point you want to be, and then move backwards and see where the potential problems will be. Now, that is a kind of survivor instinct solution, and I'll look back to that later on. Milestones in my career, some of the challenges basically kind of bringing myself from a completely different culture to a new culture, almost feeling the 17, 18 years of life before Britain, trying to understand, the culture here, actually feeling very uncomfortable about my own background and therefore not talking very much about it, trying very much to adapt, and then, having a family, the issues that you have with motherhood, etc., etc. How did I solve this? I kind of read as much as I could, tried to understand the culture that I was in, learn how I could sort of place myself within the society that I was embracing and living in, and essentially knowing or thinking that a lot of the things that were unique about me I could use as an advantage in terms of talking more about it, getting mentorship and allies. Allies very important. I'll come back to that later on as well. So not just people who could be my scientific mentors, but also people who could mentor me in terms of, navigating through the system. In terms of motherhood, this is very, very difficult. All I can say is that everyone should go by their own kind of personal, what they want in life in terms of, not feeling guilty about, working and not being at home, etc., etc. It's a very individual choice. What I can say is that children are robust, and get childcare support as much as you can. It is really important. Make sure your partner contributes equally. And in terms of where I am now, I've navigated through a system that was not designed for someone like me. And what I want to do is to try and change the system so that it can actually be more inclusive and support as many people from a diverse background as possible. I'll stop there. Hopefully that was 3 to 5 minutes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. This was very important because you already put spotlights on the important points that we kind of would like to discuss later. And I'm really happy to hear that you struggled in the same way as I struggled, because this is exactly what I mean with this. Because in order to put together a career and children, a family, that's all you can do. So something has to give, and I think it's a message. What you gave is that having a big network of friends and having all going out and having fun at the same time, you can't have it both, right? Research, being successful in research and raising a family, plus having a big social life, I think this is almost impossible. I don't know anybody. So, and since that's one take-home message. Bastian, why don't you are next in introducing your career with
Sure.
focus on.
Thank you very much for having me. So, I mean, maybe I'm probably very bad at evading the traps. I'm probably better just walking into them and then having to dig myself out of them. So what I personally experienced as already leading researchers at my previous job is that in particular there is a world of difference in terms of how different genders are being treated at say conferences. So I had to walk some of my female students actually home because they were being bothered by conference attendance. People were asking them for dates. They were asking them for hey, want to have a drink with me, stuff like this. It's a mild form, certainly, if you compare it to what could happen still, right? It's a mild form of harassment, but it was an eye-opener for me, to be honest, because my perspective was, of course, a little bit different. I mean, these conferences, you go there and a lot of people are around, but typically there is no harassment against men. In these conferences, there might be other places where this is the case, whatever, right? And so that was kind of an eye-opener for me. The other thing that I saw, I mean, I was missing, or maybe I should say like this, I was rather having a relatively lackluster support network during my PhD. So I had to rebuild some kind of networking structures and so on and so forth. And that gave me a kind of appreciation for how important these networks are, for how important these structures are, and moreover how important it is to have some form of visibility. So I try to teach my group members, of course, still ongoing here at Helmholtz, but also the people that I've been working with for a long time. I always try to almost push them into better visibility positions, making sure that they can be found by other researchers, they can be named or nominated for certain roles and so on, so that they have some kind of scientific credibility and scientific visibility, because that is something that I find is often lacking if you don't already come from a very nicely equipped, nicely networked group. And I'm happy to say this. So I mean, I'm suffering from biases like the rest of us. But my observation is that the female researchers that I've had the pleasure of working with, that they tend to undersell their value a little bit, and they don't want to necessarily say, well, I don't want to promote my research in this or that venue or in this or that opportunity, and that is really great. I mean, humility is definitely a virtue. At the same time, the goal or the cup might go to the people that are not suffering from these restrictions, right? That are just blatantly saying, this is my work, I'm awesome, deal with it. And so there is some kind of like there are some structural issues at play here where we leave a lot of people with whatever diversity backgrounds they might have, right? We kind of leave them behind. And in my opinion, we are kind of optimizing for a system that has a certain ethnicity potentially, and certainly a specific personality structure. And that is what we are optimizing for in the system currently. And I think a lot of people that are maybe even coming from a neurodivergent background, people suffering from certain illnesses there, making it very, very hard for people to participate in that system. So that's kind of my take on that.
Okay. Thank you. It sounds like you're really, really attentive into this issue, and you have done a very nice comparison between men and women, and you actually rose a lot of these issues that you encountered. But what I was missing was whether you encountered yourself personally an issue, like an issue that we kind of want to discuss here in your life, or was everything smooth and you just glided through your different mild career steps?
I'm not sure whether I really want to compare the few things that might have happened to me to what women are suffering from on a daily basis. So I mean, I was definitely discriminated against for various reasons. That's that's something that I think happens a lot more often than people might think. But other than that, I would say that I didn't have any big complaints so far, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, no, but thank you. This is what I wanted to say. So also men face certain issues. It's not only women. So the system itself has some issues, right?
Absolutely.
But this is why I wanted to have this intake, so that also our men in the audience here, that yes, it's not only happening to us women, it happens just much more often. Okay. All right. And with that, our last panel member, Annalisa, please introduce yourself with focusing on your issues that you found moving up the career ladder.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me here, and happy International Women's Day to everybody. So I also came to Germany from Italy quite early during my PhD after graduating, and I can't say I faced many cultural issues because we are talking still moving within Europe, but definitely I faced language barriers in a city like Dresden, who's kind of not very international except the research environment where I was from. This was a very positive experience. I barely thought about the gender issue or equality, because international place at the Max Planck with 70% international students, a lot of female students. So I didn't even bother to think about it at the time. And eventually it became more and more visible and subtle the years after. Nice things I want to say about my career is during my PhD and my postdoc, I had male professors or mentors that supported me big time, and that told me and encouraged me to apply for leading position during my postdoc. I think I was insecure, and without their encouragement, their pushing to do so, I don't know if I would ever dared to apply to such position. So for me, having their approval, their support was extremely important. Was a game change basically. So I was lucky in this respect. Then, when I applied for my first position as
We lost you, Annalisa.
Yeah.
Can you hear me again? I think
Yes,
the
yes.
network. Yes, the network is sometimes unstable. Yeah, so I said the first difficulties were with my first position in Berlin, because there the language barrier became really an issue. So I felt like in the discussion, like switching to German, important discussion about master programs or research program, I was cut off. So I felt like I don't belong, I have to go through an extra struggle to belong here. And also when I was like had to teach in German, it took really guts and swallow my pride to go there and give this lecture in German, knowing that your credibility is undermined when you give a lecture with a lot of mistakes. So these were kind of moments where I thought, okay, is it really the right path for me? Should I give up all in all? And so what I also experienced in a more subtle way is bullying. Yeah, also when I was a group leader, like from experienced male professor in the AI field, also being a woman doing AI, it's like sometimes, okay, not really, how to say, common, or it's becoming more and more common, but there is a whole school of AI, also in computational biologists, which also seems to struggle to accept that there are women doing AI also in computation in RNA biology. So these were probably the struggles, and of course motherhood was a very hard time. With me coincided with motherhood, then afterwards directly COVID and lockdown, and this meant no childcare for a year. Having a supportive partner, yes, my partner was very supportive, but still the struggle was huge, and then I had a lot of moments where I thought, how is this gonna work at all? I agree with what Muslifa said, that it's important to have alliances. It's important to understand how things work. When you understand how things work, you know where you should put your focus on. So this is extremely important. It's important, I think, to have for women role models that you can relate to. Not necessarily any woman, but someone that's similar to you, that went through the same struggle, because hearing how someone went through, or even the empathy itself, it's powerful and can give you the strength of going on. So I didn't have directly mentor or role models in my career from females, but there were a couple of collaborators and female scientists also in very high leading position I could relate to and I could talk to, even if few times, and this is important.
Thank you as well. So I think this also covered a lot of important points of our discussion. So now I think I would like to, Muslifa has raised her hand.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, feel free to call me Muz. Everybody calls me Muz. Secondly, I kind of also wanted to highlight a film, actually. It's called Picture a Scientist. It's on Netflix, well, at least in the UK. And we've had a session where we kind of like had a screening and a Q&A panel around it. And if it hasn't been done, maybe it has been done, I would recommend everybody watching it, because there's a lot to learn about the systemic unconscious bias, which a lot of people have talked about, and also, lessons from the women that are featured in the film.
Yeah, thank you for pointing out this movie. We actually started this Women at Helmholtz Munich month of events with that movie. So we saw it all, and I think there was also I didn't see it, but I hope you were there, right? And we had a Q&A afterwards as well, right? So I think this movie went around the world, And it might actually change. Maybe there we can introduce this cultural change that I was talking about at the introduction, right? It's a very good example. All right, I think we have two comments in the chat, but that's okay. All right, good. So then we move to the first question. Oh no, we have here somebody who wants to
wait for the microphone.
Give an input.
Yeah, just a very quick comment. So yeah, thanks so much for all your input, guys. So I think what I wanted to, I think after like the presentations now make clear maybe a little bit before we start discussing and so on, I think is maybe a few points that, like, so on the one hand, I think like what all of you made very clear, right? The problem is often systemic differences, right? That like people are just being treated differently. And that obviously means it's not necessarily, just men versus women. Also to say, because this definition is too simplified anyways, as I've explained in my talk back then, that already on the sexual basis, we have like a lot more than men and women. Actually more than 2% of all humans are karyotype based, not men or women, and that is further being pronounced via like difference in hormonal levels and so on. But then obviously on the gender level, in addition, we have so much variety, right? So I think often we should maybe go away from having this like a men versus women thing, but thinking about what are the systemic biases that make life more difficult for certain people. And obviously there are many problems for women, but I think it doesn't help if we actually assign certain character traits to women as being less competitive or whatever. I think this often is a actually consequence of people being treated differently during their entire lives because they grow up in a certain culture and because they are being told all the time that they are different and they are supposed to be different. So I think I would be very careful with making any statements about that. Obviously, there are biological differences. Obviously, the sexually female humans have to get pregnant, and there will be like inequalities, inequities because of that. But I think with everything else, to make these sorts of differences, I think I would just, like us all to be a little bit more sensitive about that in the discussion, if possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. We also have a question from Fabian.
Okay.
So Fabian, could you please unmute yourself?
Hi, sorry, I'm not exactly sure which part of the moderated discussions you are, but first I wanted to just say happy IWD. Thank you for doing this. This is fantastic. And I just wanted to ask one question, that is, what do you think can we do to remove these sort of intrinsic biases that we both have on the gender side, but then of course also, as Lara very, very importantly pointed out, on diversity, EDI being a much bigger topic. So, we talk about it, we make efforts, we really try to make sure that, we have on the TI and the department, I'm thinking about our department, what we can actually do, but also sort of in the labs that we go for diversity. But I know, for example, at Sanger, right, Mas, there's even now, if it's mandatory, but I think Illy that it's at least recommended type of training for intrinsic bias. Do you think there's some, what type of recommendations could be there that we could maybe implement also like a really hands-on fashion to be better?
So shall I answer Fabian's question as he kind of raised this? I think, Fabian, the first thing I want to say is your presence here means a lot. The fact that you are, high up in the leadership, directorship, and you're here thinking this is an important issue that needs to be addressed. And actually having the strategic vision and leadership leading the way is fundamental. And thank you very much for that. And it's fantastic for the organization. I think a lot of it is actually, recognizing, being aware that there is a problem. The problem is in our backyard and it's not someone else's backyard. Because often people say, is there a problem? Where is the problem? And that's the first thing. And that recognition comes from high above. And that there are some strategic, implementation of how to address these problems. And some of the things that I think very important include what we value as good leadership qualities. What do we mean by excellence? Often these are male-related attributes. Somebody who is seen as, being assertive in a male, that same trait is seen as bullshit in a woman. And those kind of things. what do you want? Do you want to kind of like
this is so true, like in politics it's even worse, right? Like, right, you know. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think recognizing, you know, that actually being a team player, being collaborative, these are actually fantastic leadership qualities. And recognizing that men and women are evaluated on those same characteristics, but in a very different way. These types of panel discussions are important, but I think at the end of the day, there needs to be some form of practical incentivization of things that promote positive research culture and disincentivization. So it's not just saying, oh, change your behavior, but actually, if you do this, and this, you know, we will recognize it. And if you kind of like do this and this and this, we will, you know, highlight it and say this is a negative thing and shouldn't be done. And not pretending that it doesn't exist and not allowing it to perpetuate. I'm kind of being quite broad in terms of generalizing, incentivizing and disincentivizing, but looking at data, how many, you know, some of the data that was presented earlier on, how many women actually get grants, etc., how many women in the leadership roles, what's the gender pay gap, all of those things, they are data, and you can assess what is the kind of like ethnic contributions there. In terms of, you know, race equity, all sorts. Do you need special programs? I mean, in the Sanger, one of the things that was set up, and it's not about gender equity, was this Sanger Excellence Fellowship, which was only open to Black people. And that's because 1% of, you know, all UK academics, there's only 1% of Black people who are professors. I mean, that's like nothing, 1%, given the population mix. So this is to, and then there's a huge attrition. So this is to encourage postdoctoral fellows. So those kind of things like the Amenotha Fellowship, for example, you know, they're important. And I think it's really important to see that these are not, you know, special fellowships. You only are successful because you got a fellowship that was already dedicated to, you know, meeting certain criteria that needs to sort of like be removed. And you fill in the numbers, lots can happen. Another thing I learned from NIH was also hiring by cohort. If you just put one person in there, they're not going to really make a difference. You have to have a few people and they will provide peer support and they can actually more likely to implement positive change. I'll stop now, not to dominate the conversation.
Very good. Just a brief follow-up on your comment. Of course, all genders are important, absolutely. But there is a big data gap what we have to fill. And the only way that right now that we can start moving, like removing this data gap, is by analyzing the data that we have. And that is very easy, distinguishing the biological sex. And that's why we're focusing at the moment at getting a data set that we can actually say something. It will be very important in the future to collect data on all the different genders in order to make these statements and in order to introduce a cultural change. And that we can just do moving forward, because all the questionnaires and all the data that have been collected, there will be a very low percentage which kind of focuses on this question. Yeah, fine.
Yeah, I totally agree, right? We often have to simplify things to get started. These efforts are great. I think that the points that I wanted to make is that these things are often a lot more complex, right? Especially like we've also just heard about intersectionality when it comes in, you know, like the cultural background of people. Like, for example, I mean, I think that the point that I, to very bluntly say it, is making the point that we have this systemic problem where white men have like for centuries, right? Like just dominated the world and have profited from it. And that we are still in a world that is sort of, you know, being influenced by that, with a lot of change already having happened. But that I must admit there are men from disadvantaged communities, there are different genders, you know, that also like really experience disadvantages for whatever reason. And from that, I don't want to at all like not discuss the issue for women in science, but I think the point is, when we want to tackle this problem, it's not about talking about how women are different to men, exactly what we've also just heard, that maybe men and women are not different, but they're just being evaluated differently, but to actually acknowledge the problem is systemic there.
Yeah,
right?
We're agreeing on that. I'm just saying we don't have the data. We should collect them.
Yeah, but if we start like doing this binary men versus women thing, and like saying coming in here and only women get flowers, and saying, oh yeah, that's a woman, so I have to hold the door open for her, I have to like be that way to her in some way. We have to think about if we are not perpetuating certain images that have been given to us culturally. Okay, that's all I want to say. That's why I think this binary men versus women is bad, not for actually trying to make, you know, a better life for women in science, not at all. For this, the definition is great. For the other thing, not.
Yes, you're absolutely right. But this is a International Women's Day, and this is why we're focusing on women. And it's only for that reason that the flowers have been. We didn't want to discriminate anybody who didn't get a flower for. Okay, I just really want to make this point has to be clear. That absolutely we should consider all genders, but this is the International Women's Day, and this is why we're focusing today on this. And we won't have any data regarding any other genders. Okay, all right, that's absolutely, and it's a very important point. Okay, so let's move on to the first question. So we in the organizational committee kind of wanted me to ask a first question is we have these two definitions, gender equity and gender equality, right? And so how can we go about this? How can we address the difference between the two? Can you help us with this specifically if we're looking at academia? Who wants to start off, you guys?
I mean, it's very, so perhaps, I don't know if everybody is aware of the difference between equality and equity, but I've seen this very nice example on YouTube. You know, equality is when you are given equal opportunities, basically, to apply for position, money, etc. Equity is that you give everybody the means to succeed. And there is this very nice example of you have three people, a disabled people, a little child, and a tall person, and you give them exactly the same big bike. Only the very tall person will be able to ride it and be successful. The child will not be able to climb up, and the disabled person will not be able to ride that bike. So it's about giving the instrument that everybody needs such that everybody can be successful in the same way. And this is kind of not the same for everybody, right? Did I get that right? So it's hard to say how to implement it in academia, because the risk is to say that then you are discriminating if you give different means to different people. So how can we do this to ensure gender equity with concrete measures? It's hard, to be honest, to come up with concrete idea.
I see Muslifa who wants to add here some insights.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great summary of what inequality is, and what, you know, some of the kind of like fellowship schemes, those address equity, and equity can only really be addressed if you have the data to show that there is inequality.
Yeah. Bastian?
Yeah. Maybe to add a little bit of a myopic view here, but I think an important thing for ensuring or at least promoting equity involves that decisions that involve the evaluation of researchers are done with removing as many biases as possible, even most importantly, of course, maybe the unconscious biases that we are all suffering from. And that could even go so far as to use like anonymized type of submissions. Of course, we're doing this already in a lot of journals, even though I'm not sure whether I'm sure we could improve even more there, but maybe even go so far as to do these as to do all kinds of evaluations and curriculum vitae and these sort of things in a way that blinds us to the person behind that. Not sure whether this is the right direction, but I think at least like thinking a little bit about these things could be useful. In particular, when you hear about some kind of discrimination that is still ongoing in parts of the world when it comes to academic leadership by women. Yeah.
Thank you so much for giving us this practical advice, right? Because I think absolutely true, just already in the application process, it is important to be unbiased regarding any gender, any race, any color, anything. And this is where the United States may be a little bit more ahead of us. I don't know the UK, but you don't have to submit a picture of yourself. You don't have to give your age. You don't have to give your sex or gender. It's all not necessary. It's only about your professional experience that counts, and your, of course, they have a lot of social, if you have your social activities, the social or hobbies or whatever, that stuff. But this is only based on an individual, and the individual is just one individual compared to the other, and no other things are attached. Okay. All right. I think this question is
maybe one concrete thing is really age limitations in all this grant and fellowship program. This is a big thing, and I think it's one of the reasons why 80% of the students drop academia after a PhD or a postdoc, because there are in place such fellowship program. But I heard many times from my students saying, yeah, but I want a family, and by the time I will be too old, and maybe, yeah. So the age, I think.
Thank you so much. The age is so important. I'm just doing now a personal example from my side. I studied in Italy, like you at Padua, and in Italy you are required when you graduate that you have your thesis done. All right. So my doctoral thesis has been done at the end of the medical studies, and then I fall through all the age limits that are in place, whatever you call it. If it's a DFG, if it's a European Union, if it's whatever. Because immediately you have the postdoc, like 3 years or 4 years of postdoc then attached to this. And then there are others who have procrastinated and have submitted their PhD thesis maybe 8 years after they finished their medical school. They're still eligible for all of that. And where this is not equal at all. I'm not talking women, men here. It's just women, or whatever. Or
this is
whatever.
a general trick. So basically, I recommend to all PhD students that want to continue in academia. I know we should maybe get a bit of a pay raise, that sort of thing, but stay relaxed about submitting your thesis, because all these times are starting to tick, and they're all relative to PhD submission. It's kind of super strange. But yeah.
No, why are you doing this to me, Fabian? Okay, so I had no choice. Otherwise I wouldn't have gotten my degree, right? I had to have my PhD.
I know there's always constraints.
So all the Italians here have a problem.
You're right. It's unfair.
You're discriminating against Italians.
Well, also, US, I mean, those timelines, they are not synced all over the world, right? Yes. So obviously, this is age-wise yeah, I agree. Don't want to discriminate against Italians.
No, but Susanna, I mean, I got my PhD in Germany, and it's also a KPI from the Max Planck Institute to say all our students graduate within 3 to 3.5 years. So I graduated within 3 years. I also did my PhD in 3 years, which is supposed to be a very high KPI, but then.
I know, and this is a KPI that have been pushed forward again and again, because of course there was this idea of exploitation of PhD students. That's where this comes from. And this has been a big historic issue. That's why you need to actually open up the option so you guys can finish. If you want to go to industry in particular, and people at that point usually know we should make it quick for them. They don't need another paper. But if you want to stay in academics, that might be a way to go this route. But you should not exert pressure. I agree. This is a bit on off route, so I shut up. But I just was mentioning to that.
No, I think it's just worth kind of promoting the idea that they should remove the age limit for these kind of like awards, etc. And many of the funders in the UK have done that, and there's evidence that you can do it elsewhere and still for it to be a successful program, and that just needs to be permeated to the other funders across the world, really.
Well, but with age limit, often it means relative to, it means scientific age, so relative to submission of
yeah. PhD.
But even
so
that,
the 10 years or whatever PhD, so that anybody can apply. So there's just no age cutoff from PhD. As
you kind of want to protect the juniors as well, right? You don't want to have us now applying for an ESC starting grant, because then Bastian would have a hard time.
Yeah, what you find is that never happened. That hasn't happened so far.
Okay, I have a comment. I think from your side?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add a comment that I think for me to promote equity, it's very important to make the evaluations and hiring process, everything's quite transparent. So this requires some transparent metrics, evaluation metrics to show why we selected this candidate or why we, for example, accepted these grants and not the other one. I think this is the most important thing, but this is missing quite a lot in a lot of countries for hiring, for grants, I believe. So what do you think is the barrier for this, for such transparency?
Who wants to answer that question? Bastian, please.
I think my assuming good intentions on all sides, I would say that the main thing why things are the way they are is because we never question them again. So many of the systems that we have in place right now have been added or have been designed 50, 60 years back. And we had, very luckily, we had a lot of demographic changes and a lot of societal changes, and we were moving towards in my opinion, a better society and a more open society. But we're all kind of still stuck in the 1950s mindset in academia. So we're all like using the same processes all over again. Maybe one funny thing about machine learning, for instance, is that when people started doing this, they had like maybe 50 people. They could all fit into like any seminar room and everyone knew everyone else. Now we have a few thousand people and we're still using the same processes. And this just doesn't scale very well, but no one wants to go there now and wants to be the person that says, no, we need to dismantle these systems and we need to rebuild them. But I think that is exactly what we need to do. I mean, if we find that it doesn't work, right? I mean, yes. Our academia, so.
Bastian, I think you raised a really, really important point. We are stuck, I think not even the 50s, I think in the 19th century, okay? Because all our education systems, everything is based on this ideal, which was good for a century ago, you know, and we have to tackle this and we have to actually really get an actual working system into place. And because you just you just mentioned this, I would like just to continue with you real quickly. Because we'd mentioned at my introduction, I mentioned the boys club, right? And so I want to address it to you because you are the man in the panel, right? Yeah. How do you think we can make men good allies for us, or the white man as a good ally for us to move our careers forward? How do we need to engage and to encourage our male advocates in order to help us, to foster us, to move us forward?
It's a tough question. I don't have an easy answer. I mean, I would say asking and engaging them constantly can be useful. My personal experience is that the newer generation is much more open to this, but at the same time, there is also an older generation of professors certainly around that is saying like, we did things this way, and you have to like play the game the way I want it to be played. So I guess picking the right allies, the right mentors is a crucial task, and I have no simple solution, unfortunately.
Okay, Muslifa, please.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to say two things. One is about systems and changing a system because that's how it's being done. There's another component to that to consider in that. Why should those who find that the system works and benefits them want to change the system? I think that's quite important to recognize and address because it's a system that has worked for a group of individuals over centuries. So why change it? So that's something to consider. And the other thing in terms of allyship, I think this can come not just from men, but from a range of groups. Everybody who has a minority trait that is not supported in the current system, they all share something in common. And they can all come and have a common collective together. And that's not just sex, gender, race, etc. All of those, many things, socioeconomic differences, life opportunities differences. So there is something that, you know, you can do as a collective and can be allies for one another. And you know, that's something that's important. But there are also specific things for each group that are unique. So there's, you know, value in pooling together and being allies and support networks and pushing the agenda forward for change, or make it better rather than just simply change. But there's also value in kind of like recognizing that there are individual issues for each of those groups. In the UK, there is a thing called EDIS, and organizations can sign up. I'll put it in the chat. And here there are kind of like concerted overall sort of like leadership strategies or recommendations that can be deployed in the various organizations. The Wellcome Trust has championed EDIS, and I think it's worth looking at how a lot of initiatives can be grouped together and have power from momentum and collective action, because every organization is doing its own EDI. But maybe it's also, there's also value in pooling lessons learned and sharing experiences.
Thank you. That was also a very, very important point. Do we have some question in the chat? No. Annalisa?
Yes, and connecting to this, exactly. So when it comes to women specifically, I think a structured or a mentorship program in place would be beneficial from women that have done a successful career, how they navigated that, what they did in particular occasion. I mean, the Max Planck has this Minerva program, and it's a mentorship for women, which is carried on by both men and women. So you can have a male mentor. But I think for me, what was important, again, as I said at the beginning, was to be able to relate to some traits or some, even in terms of personality or in terms of choices, to some very successful women. And this gave me a boost at the time. So I think it doesn't have to be much, but being somehow guided through our similar experiences, because yeah, sharing experiences, sharing difficulties is very powerful to boost motivation.
Thank you very much for this also input, because also a very brief example in my life is like I've lived a long time in the United States, and they started early on having at these big national meetings. You call it the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association, where you have really very, very large attendance. They had women luncheons where you could go as a PhD student, postdoctoral fellow, and meet really face-to-face these role models, not only in research, but also clinicians that were head of departments and stuff. And they actually walked you through their difficulties, and they kind of gave you really practical tips how you can encounter your difficulties and move on, you know. And I think this is something that is absolutely missing in our like kind of meetings at all, right? So this educational part is not there. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, then we have a comment from.
Yeah, I quickly wanted to add a comment, because it was very briefly mentioned, and it links to a lot of what you've just been discussing, I think, which is the childcare issue, right? That I think women are just, you know, like obviously they have to be the ones who are pregnant, but then afterwards that very often there's also still an increased burden of childcare on women. And this is often the point where they actually drop out of their scientific career. But it's just why we see so many more junior female scientists, but not more senior, or one of the factors. But I think this is an important factor, because this is maybe something where we can all do something individually, right? So if you want to be a dad, you know, like be aware of, you have to put aside the same amount of time per default, right, as the woman. Obviously, then there will always be like individual agreements on how you actually do it. But I think to have like this default understanding of it, but also have a cultural change, and that it's totally okay, right? That we start understanding that it's okay that men are going to be away from work for childcare, and that we are not introducing any biases on this front. But then also systematically, because I think like so I'm not exactly sure how the system is in Germany right now, because I only moved here last year, but I think like I would get like 3 months completely off, fully paid right now if I got a child. I think for fathers it's like 1 or 2 weeks max, right? And for like at certain companies, like my husband's company, like they would give him 14 weeks as a man, completely, fully paid, free of, right? So this is directly like, I mean, introducing a different sort of incentive, right, for him to be like, oh wow, you know, I can like more than 3 months, 3.5 months, stay at home. And it's actually like, if they are taking this time, they are being completely shut off the system, so they're not even allowed to access the clusters and anything, you know, because they're like, yeah, this should be full support. So I think that's also systemically what we can really change, and I think that would contribute a lot already.
Carsten in the back.
Comment to Laura's comment on the availability of childcare places. I think that's a very important point, and actually there's something we can also change here maybe. So I would be super interested in seeing how many people are on the waiting list at the childcare here on campus, and if we cannot, you know, write a couple of letters to make more places there as soon as possible.
Absolutely right. I think, but Germany is facing a real problem. It's so, but you're right. Annalisa, please.
Yes, I think what said is very important, and sharing the responsibility and everything. But I want to allow me to erase something here, which goes a bit deeper than that. And for the career of a mother with young child, it's not only my experience, but also from other female professors I've heard, and that was touched this topic. It's like your personal struggle with that, and your sense of guilt of being so committed to your career, while having to deliver. There are certain expectations, yeah, also from the society, that you have to meet as a mother of a family. There are expectations at work, and you constantly deal with this internal struggle, feeling like you are letting someone down, you're letting someone in your group down where you're not available, but you are letting also your family down where you're not available. And I know many women that struggle with that. And this is also a reason to drop out for some. For many. Just wanted to bring it up.
No, it's a very important point. It's an absolute very important point, because we all know how important it is that you are there for your children. Absolutely true. Bastian, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to this. So, I mean, we men suffer from also here. Like, I mean, I know that it's not to erase the other thing, but I mean, there's also still, like, depending on which type of industry or which place you're working at, people are still like also saying like, well, okay, yeah, you have a child now, that's great for you. So when you're coming back, right? So these things are still in place, and that's also like a systemic issue, or that's even like a socialization issue, or overall, that we have these predefined roles in our head that says, okay, culturally, if you're a mom, you have to do this. Culturally, if you're a dad, you have to do this. And it's really important to like break out of these things and to decide what works for oneself. And I think ideally employers should be much more amenable to these changes and much more flexible here.
Right. Mulifa, please.
Yeah, I think the childcare issue is very important, and this is where kind of senior leadership and the organization can really make a difference in terms of trying to ensure that there is access to childcare, you know, the nursery places, that there isn't a waiting list, etc. Ensuring equal maternity and paternity, or, you know, time off, parenting time off, basically, not necessarily just restricted to maternity and paternity, being aware of adoption related time off as well. All of that can come from, you know, having a strategic sort of like leadership policies and etc. to make it more inclusive. But I want to, you know, pick up on the kind of like social aspects of having a childcare, these social expectations. This is actually slightly different globally, and I just want to bring the perspective, because you know, when I grew up, there was a much more plural concept of, you know, parenting. You're not just parented by your mum and dad, by your grandparents, your uncles and aunts, and that was something I was more used to in Asia. And when I came to the UK, it was very sort of like nuclear family, mum and dad. Basically, these two individuals parent the child, and therefore, if one of you is not doing the job and someone else is doing it, it's seen as a failure or, you know, incompetency. And I think there's a little bit of that element that needs to change. And there are lots of other cultures where this hasn't been the case for centuries, and are far more accepting of a plural nature of parenting rather than the nuclear nature that is often in the European or Western societies.
Thank you for raising this point. There is a saying, right? You need a village
You need a village to raise a child. Yeah,
raise
exactly.
a child. And it has been like that in our communities as well, not only in Asia, but somehow this exceptionalism or this focus on yourself, that you are the one who can do everything and all the doors are open to you, you just have to do it, is something kind of that we are running after. It's an idealism or an ideal that I think that is not realistic, right? And this is, I think, where it comes from, what you said, that now like all the burden lays on the couple, mom and dad, right? Whatever couple that is, right? And if they cannot manage it 100%, they failed. And that is a major paradigm that I think I just want to highlight again what you said. That is a major paradigm that we have to change. And the second one, just very quickly, is one more layer of complexity lays in that you have, as a mom and dad, have to be comfortable with the childcare that you are able to get, because there are different qualities of childcare. And if you're not comfortable what's going on, then you're not working well because you're worried about the child. Right? Okay, Fabian?
Yeah.
I just wanted to briefly pick up on the point that was made with respect to what can the employers do, because we within the computational health department really want to and have been very actively, I think, also discussing how we can make culture family friendly in particular, and this sort of attaches also the point that Bastian was raising in your analysis. Of course, we cannot change the external criteria, KPIs, and so on that people put upon. That you need to have a complete full publication track record, even though there's the necessary parental leave breaks. But I think this type of culture, Carsten, you mentioned, more support places and so on. I mean, this is sort of longer region, Jim, that we maybe as a sort of local employer, we cannot change, but at least, making the culture data that people feel free to take whenever they want parental leave. And Lara, having sort of also easy access to Elternzeit. And I think this is maybe the harder part, then also getting us, and there's, I think we as leaders looking at the PIs, we need to also then be examples for the more juniors that we can then actually also do these things and implement this and also have a successful academic career, even though, you take some time off or so and do these things.
Okay, so just like, because we are already on the topic, we had thought about a question that we really were very, very curious to ask you is, if we hear now about all these barriers and problems, what do you think? Would you now, your own children, recommend to embark into this science world that we are facing right now and try to become successful?
Yes, 100%. Because it's a beautiful job, and yes, I mean, if you have the passion for it, and because there is much more awareness, and people work on raising this awareness, and people talk about concrete measures, and yes, I would recommend it 100%, because having the right support network and having some concrete things to work on to help your career, it's possible, and you can be successful. And I would especially hope that young female scientists get these messages as well, that there are struggles. Yes, there are inequalities. We are far from reaching a 50% in many areas, but there is much more awareness than before, and that we are working on these measures, and that get someone that guides you through and makes you understand that the struggle it's possible to overcome it.
Okay, thank you. So Bastian, please, you raise the hand next.
Yeah, same here. I mean, it's also, in general, it's also a societal issue anyway, right? I mean, it's not, we're not the only ones suffering from this, or we're not the only ones where the only part of society where we're facing such problems, right? So in some sense, there is no escaping these issues. So academia is just one part of many here. And if the kids want that, then that's great for them, and I can definitely encourage them, because I'm optimistic about the future. So I think that even with societal changes ongoing, we're moving towards a better future, and at least being aware of these issues already helps in that direction.
Muslifa, please.
I think that touches on why we really need to promote equality, diversity, and inclusion, because that is our responsibility for our children and the next generation of people. It should actually incentivize us even more to, make sure that the future, the legacy that we leave behind, is one that is full of opportunities for our children, for our sons and daughters.
So here you have it. All right. That's good to hear. I think you're absolutely right. I love the job, and I think people, even if you have a lot of frustrations, every day it's worthwhile doing it. Okay. So another question that I think was important to kind of get answered within kind of the beginning is, we want to hear about good experience that you had. Where can you just give us some examples where like opening up to diversity has basically to improve or help the team or a collaboration or a project? Can you give us some examples where it is worthwhile the effort to go through this?
I couldn't hear you very well, actually, for some reason or another.
Me neither.
Okay, here I go again. Apparently my mic is dead and our technician left. Okay. All right, here we go again. What I was asking was whether you can give us an example of a successful integration of diversity in the team that made it better compared to the previous team that had less of it. Can you give us some positive examples why we should go through this effort to integrate, to be inclusive, to have everybody on board? Yeah. Muslifa, please.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a book called Rebel Ideas written by Matthew Syed, who actually talks about why diversity matters. And it's basically, if you think of the problem space, if you think of it as like, the entire kind of like screen that you see, the Zoom screen that you see lots of us. That's myself, all of the other host members, etc., and the audience, and we are occupying all of the different elements of that screen. Now, if you only had one person, that's, you are not going to occupy, you're not going to get a diverse input. And therefore, you just won't get the innovative solutions. You're not going to get the creative answers to the problems. And really, diversity is an asset, and it matters if you are wanting a successful organization. In terms of my own personal experience, I come from a very biological-based, training, immunology and dermatology. And I've had to embrace computational analysis. And over the years, the lab has expanded and included individuals with very different background. But it isn't just in terms of expertise. It's also, many different kind of like, different traits. And what that has really helped is bringing the perspective of a particular ethnic group, particular, the lived experiences are so rich that it really contributes in terms of innovating solutions in the lab and how we move forward, deriving our vision for the next few years, etc.
Thank you. Bastian, do you have an example?
Yeah, tons of examples actually,
Okay.
in different, I would also say in different dimensions. So I would say that basically all my projects were enriched by including people with different backgrounds in intersectional terms, different perspectives. Everyone brought something different there. The greatest collaborations that I had were with bringing actually some clinical doctors on board that were just interested in machine learning stuff, and they really helped us understand our problems much more better than we would have anticipated before. And so, like, in many different dimensions, I can only stress that having a diverse team is absolutely vital for 21st century science, essentially, because we're not experts in the whole domain anymore, unfortunately. So we have to bring in other people, and that will ultimately only enrich our work, I would say.
Okay, thank you. That has been very nice to hear. Annalisa, please.
Yeah, I can relate to the examples of Boston as well. I would like to emphasize that internationality and interdisciplinarity has added to our group and to all the projects, but especially so people also from different cultures have different ways of communicating and perceive communication, and that's beautiful, and that makes us all better communicators to understand how we need to communicate with people with different backgrounds, with different cultural experiences. And this is, I think, also very important in science, very important for your career as well.
All right. I have one last question, and I want to be a little bit provocative. This is unexpected for you guys as well. Now we talked about all these beneficial effects of diversity, right? How big this impact would be. I just want to just raise the question, do you think there's a limit to this diversity? How much diversity is good? And is there the risk if there's too much of it? Would that kind of also like then bring us down again? It's very provocative, I know, but I just want to hear.
I can start off. I'm not entirely sure that you can say there is too much diversity. I mean, at the end of the day, what we want is an environment that provides that everyone can achieve the most and the best in the context of the world that we live in, and that is in the form of opportunities and achievements through these opportunities, etc. And they're very individualized. And I'm not sure there is ever a situation where too much diversity would impair that. I find it quite hard to imagine. There will be challenges in terms of the implementation. As I said, different groups will have their own unique needs, which are not going to be addressed by lumping everyone together. One example is that if you look at BAME, British Asian, Black Asian minority ethnic groups, which is a term used in the UK, it really is no longer fit for purpose because BAME covers pretty much everything and everyone who's not white, basically. And therefore there are individual lived experiences of the Black community, the Asian community, which are all heterogeneous even within the Black and Asian categories as well. So I kind of feel that there is never going to be too much diversity, but I just feel that all we need to do is to kind of get people to make the world a better place so that everyone can achieve the best that they can.
We have a comment to this in the audience here. Oh, okay.
Thanks. I very much agree on that there cannot be too much diversity. What I think is an important point is that this is a discussion that's very much active in an academic and in societies in the cities. I think it's important not to look down on people that may not have made those discussions as much, and to include people also for that, that might be taken a bit apart. For them, this might be too much diversity. Maybe that's also what you're hinting at. And I think it would be important to, give them also the room to learn about these topics.
Yep. I think the mic just dropped out again, but I could hear you.
Bastian, please.
Yeah. No. So I can echo that. I mean, it's fundamentally about making a workplace, making a society that is where people feel welcome and included. And so I'm not sure whether there is a way to naturally impose a limit on this. But at the same time, it's also kind of important to communicate these steps to people, and also to be precise maybe in the terminology that we're using, because there is of course a lot of reservations here, in particular since people feel that something might be taken away from them. But I think to counteract all these narratives, the best thing is to make it clear that they don't really benefit from that anyway. So it's not the people that benefit from this, or that used to benefit from this, they're long gone, or maybe retired or something like this. So it's like building a better system helps everyone in the end. And so that's I think an important narrative to push through a little bit.
Thank you very much. So Annalisa.
Yes, I second what was already said. There is not never enough diversity, but I think there is a limit in the sense that if people endanger the values of diversity and inclusion that we try to establish in the group, then that then becomes a danger, and then there is a limit for me, because this might destroy this kind of culture.
All right. I think that was a very good final words. If I don't see anybody like wanting to say something or comment on the last question, then I would conclude our discussion, right? A little bit over time, but not too much, and say, please go on to the networking event that's taking place after all. And I would really like to thank you, all three of you, to be available and to be so actively engaged in this discussion, and for your valuable insight. It is really important, I think, that the community knows about it and that you make the extra effort and communicate this, okay? Because I think that's very crucial to move forward our agenda. Thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Bye now.